Hello and welcome to today's session. So, we are continuing to look at Arthur Miller's play, Death of a Salesman, and we are coming towards the end of this play. We are reaching the final segments of this play, and we also saw how after Willie gets fired, how after he gets fired from his job as a salesman, that is almost like the culmination point, and it also begins to signal his deterioration, his mental deterioration, his physical deterioration, and also how he begins to crumble down as a person, as a family man, as a professional. We begin to see that in more tangible ways after that moment. And he's still in denial. He does not want to accept what has befallen him and the reality that his family is facing. So this meeting that Willie has with Bernard and Charlie, that serves as a it gives us an insight into the kind of denial, the depth of the denial with which Willie Loman has always been living. So this comparison between Biff and Bernard, it's very painful for Willie Loman to accept, and this also sort of challenges the ideas of success that Willie Loman has in mind, the romantic way in which he's been looking at the American dream, the notions of success about material wealth, fame, and more importantly, about the likability, about how a personality, when once a person has a personality which is very well liked by everyone, he equates that with success. But Bernard is also Bernard's life is also living testimony of how that notion is not entirely reliable. This ideal notion of success is not entirely reliable, because actual success is something very, very different. So here we find a set of characters trying to operate within the constraints of the American dream, and we find them negotiating with this dream in different ways. Of course, Willie Loman's is a very extreme case over here, and this entire family, they were invested in a lot of things which were largely there at the level of idealism. It was just a dream, and for the dream to transition into a reality, they also had to stay in touch with the actual sense of what success is, the actual sense of how one had to go through this material world. That is where the family loses touch with reality. So Willie, when Willie is asking Bernard, how did you, why didn't he ever catch on, that is one of the most painful scenes in this entire play, where Willie Loman he's forced to accept that the boy, his son's classmate, whom he thought will never make it, who was not seen as a someone with a very likable personality. He never came across as attractive in an athletic way, or in in a way his personality was emerging as being very attractive. So he finds that this is one hard hitting moment for Willie Loman, and still there is a way in which he continues to tamper that reality with a sense of denial, a sense of dreamlike sequence. So we find a lot of flashbacks and foreshadowing over here, and this is one recurring technique as we see in the play until Willie Loman disappears from the play. Until we see the end of Willie Loman, we find that these techniques of flashbacks and foreshadowing are used recurrently to indicate the stronghold the past has over the characters present as well as the future. So we find that the past keeps coming back in very recursive ways, and sometimes in very unhelpful ways too. And it's not really allowing Willie Loman to move ahead. He's still stuck with the image that he has of himself, about his sons, and that image is something he's more heavily invested in than what is happening in the contemporary, during his present. And this also brings us to another core point about how Willie Loman also, knowingly and inadvertently had caused Biff's academic failure. This the what happened in Boston, that unspeakable thing about what happened in Boston, which Bernard keeps asking Willie about what happened there, because Biff seems to have changed radically after Biff visited Willie Loman in Boston, and that remains as one unspeakable thing, which obviously is a reference to um, Willie's infidelity. So this scene is very poignant. This meeting that Willie Loman has with Bernard and Charlie, and these encounters with reality, and his continuing insistence, its continuing denial of this reality. It almost signals, it almost helps the audience also to foreshadow the kind of ending that Willie Loman is bound to meet with. So if we also quickly take a look at, yeah. So here is where they have this encounter. Bernard is asking what happened in Boston, Willie, and Willie takes great offense at that, and he finds that question offensive, and he's very angry with Bernard. But at the same time, he also needs help. So he's asking Charlie right after Bernard leaves, for help, and he promises to pay every penny back. But he's also the kind of person who cannot touch base with reality even when things are going really wrong. So Charlie offers him a job. Charlie offers Willie Loman a job, and that is something that he is unable to take. He was just fired, and Charlie is also asking, and why he's not realizing how grave this situation is, and he offers him a job. I just can't work for you. So that's how Charlie is responding to this situation. And he continues to insist that he's keeping strict accounts. And this is the moment when Charlie reminds him of the insurance. And this again is another turning point, though we will get to know about this only much later, where Willie realizes this. Maybe this was always there at the back of his mind, which is why perhaps he was also trying to kill himself, as we get to know right at the outset of the play, when Linda is sharing that with her sons. Funny, after all the highways and the trains and the appointments and the years, you end up worth more dead than alive. And that's exactly what happens at the end. Yeah, he is for the insurance money, he thinks that it's best for him to kill himself. But the ironic thing is that the family does not get that money either. So in life and in death, there seems to be this disillusionment which is continuing to follow him. So when Act 2 is progressing, we find that Willie Loman's the oscillation between the real world and the past memories, and his investment in the past, that continues to grow it progressively continues to grow in a way that it almost becomes fatal for him. So we find that Willie is not just self-delusional, but he's also very proud. He's very proud in an unhealthy way, and he is proud to work for to keep himself afloat. Yeah, his family needs the money. He needs the money, and he also needs the money for making the insurance policy payments, which will become useful for him in the future too. But he just refuses to take um, into account the reality that he is sinking into, and more importantly, he's refusing to take responsibility for the change in Biff's behavior. This becomes all the more pertinent in the following scene when he meets with the boys in a restaurant. So his reaction is that of anger. Whenever he is being forced to encounter reality, to accept reality, his response is always that of frustration and anger. This is something, again, we find as recursive pattern from the beginning of the play. When he returns from one of his business trips, one of his salesman trips, when Linda is trying to even out of concern, trying to find out what went wrong or how things were on the road, his immediate response is always that of a frustrated, angry person. This has a heavy impact on his family life, and more importantly, it has an even more severe impact in the way he deals with reality. And his mental deterioration becomes all the more grave, because he refuses to acknowledge this the many realities which are around him. So Willie's tragedy, in that sense, it's both personal as well as social, and that is what he realizes in this exchange that we noticed between him and Charlie. And this also foreshadows his final decision in so many ways. Though Charlie comes across as very pragmatic, yeah, he also knows the way these things work, but he, as well as Bernard, they come across as being more pragmatic, and that seems to be doing the trick for them in terms of finding their way, negotiating with this American dream. So one is not exactly sure whether the problem, where exactly the problem lies, but a host of things might have gone wrong in the way Willie Loman planned his life, the way he raised his kids in terms of certain misplaced value systems. Yeah, all that is there. But more importantly, what works completely against his disadvantage is his difficulty to come into terms with what is happening in the ground. What happens in this in reality. That is the tragedy of what he's facing. So on the one hand, there is a nation, perhaps, it's also a commentary on at least certain segments of the nation, which is also not trying to recover after the Great Depression, after the 1930s. So there are multiple ways in which different segments of the nation is trying to negotiate with this reality too. So this denial is, in some form, it's a very complementary feeling too. So we find Willy Loman the kind of person who is unable to um, come out of that state, and in some form, in so many ways, stuck in a glorious past, which again, we're not even sure whether that was glorious enough, or whether again, it's a creation of his own imagination. So again, the following scene in Act 2 itself, when Biff and Happy meet Willie at a restaurant, that's again, a lot of more things are being revealed, and we will not go into the details of their conversations, but what gets foregrounded even at the end of this exchange is how Willie's inability to accept reality affects all of them collectively. So there is a huge disillusionment about Biff's prospects, and Biff also, because Biff was also raised in such a way that he also thought he's going to make it really big. So he's, on the one hand, Biff wants to Biff wants to continue to keep up that image, but on the other hand, he also wants Willy Loman to wake up to the reality, wake up to what Biff really is, and have a real conversation. So he says, I was never a salesman for Bill Oliver. That is something we find that in the play, they continue to have this conversation. So even in the play, they continue to have this conversation where Biff is expected to meet Bill Oliver, but he cannot because he's still unsure about his prospects, and Willie thinks that if he meets, or first Willie, even the conversation when we go through that, it's quite difficult because they are both in their own worlds. Even when they are trying to convince each other, they are both stuck in their notions about what Biff is capable of doing, and they're unable to take that conversation in a fruitful way. So Willie continues to be in this state where he does not want to accept reality, but we find that Biff is moving closer to self-awareness. Biff is moving closer to this reality, and he also, tries to convince Willy Loman that he was only a shipping clerk there, and he was never a salesman, and his prospects are not looking that great. It is perhaps, going to continuing to be a bit limited in so many ways. So we find that this is it's a very 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 fine line between breaking Willie's illusions and about trying to maintain his illusions. It's important to maintain his illusions for his mental health, but it's also important to break out of it for pragmatic reasons, which again it's a very vicious cycle, which again will contribute, which again will affect his mental health. Yeah. So because there are a number of other minor instances too, which are being referred to here, about how Biff flunked math, and that is being seen partly Biff's fault and mostly the instructor's fault, and about him stealing Oliver's pen and refusing to take responsibility for that. So this is a very complicated timeline. It's a very complicated, emotionally entangled a series of things where all these characters, at some point or the other, they fail to take responsibility for their actions, and what makes it worse is they continue to live in this state of denial. So here, as the play is drawing to an end, we find that this boundary between past and present breaks down almost completely. When Willie is meeting with Biff and Happy in the restaurant, in the same breath, like he has always been doing throughout the play, in between, he slips into a time and he's having a conversation with Linda about the kids, and the kids are there, they're in high school. So this movement across time segments, these time switches, they become more and more frequent as the play draws to an end. And Willie is haunted also, by this memory of Biff calling him a fake a number of years ago. And there are these constant allusions to his infidelity. The motive of the stalkings keep coming back. And this facade of affluence that Willie wants to project, he wants to show it to the world that he's doing well, his sons are doing well, and he seems to be drawing much in terms of his identity, in terms of his personality, in terms of his mental health from that facade. But on the other hand, there is also this infidelity he's been trying to deal with. So we find that it is very complicated, not just in terms of the socioeconomic and the changes that he's trying to deal with in an external way, in a way which is outside of his family. Even within the family, there are these, the memories, the past incidents that he's trying to negotiate with. So the theme of abandonment and betrayal, it's something that gets foregrounded in more central ways as we draw towards the end of the play. We realize, in one of these reminiscences, when one of these time switches, we realize how Willie was abandoned by his father, and perhaps that had an implication on the kind of insecurities and these projected qualities that he sees on himself as well as on the rest of his family. And later, when in the middle of this conversation, we find that his sons also leave him behind at the restaurant, and he also has not been living up to the expectations as a family man, and he's been unfaithful to his wife Linda. So this is a very thin line between the expectations that he has from his family and what he has been offering to them as a father, as a husband. So this, in some level, it's also mirroring how the American dream gets played out in the lives of these different characters, personified here played here by Willie and his sons. So there's also this record, there's a promise on the one hand, there's also a recurring betrayal of the American dream in all of their lives. So we find that all characters are disillusioned at so many different levels. So Linda perhaps, does not know yet about the betrayal, the act of betrayal, the infidelity which Willie Loman had committed. Now, but at the same time, there is a sense of disillusionment in her mind about her husband and her sons. The sons are equally disillusioned and disappointed by what their parents are and how they were raised, and about the kind of psychological as well as the societal trauma that they had been facing, the peer pressure, and how this thing about having to deal with this reality that perhaps things are really not working out for them. And we find that all of these things get replicated, they get mirrored in their lives, and in Charlie and Bernard's life, we see the dream getting played out in a different way altogether. Maybe we do not get an insight into the kind of memories that Bernard has about his childhood. Maybe it's equally traumatic trying to manage this world of reality and dream. And now that in the present, when we are meeting them, Bernard comes across as more successful than the Loman boys. And perhaps if one were to do a time switch and get into what Bernard and Charlie had been facing, it might reveal another side of the American dream, another struggle which another family is going through. So this becomes typical in some sense. It's very unique and typical at the same time, and that also again and again foregrounds the need to look at this notion of wealth, of success, of the material aspects of life, fame, and all of this in more critical terms, which is what Adamel also continues to do in the next play that we shall be reading, which is All My Sons. So as the play draws to an end, there is this final confrontation where he is torn between, Willie Loman is torn between hallucinations and desperation. And Willie just cannot stop imagining this conversation with Ben. If you remember, right from the beginning of his the play, there were these constant time switches which were taking him back to Ben, and we find that this his mental breakdown is massively triggered by this feeling of rejection, which is real in some sense, and also the trivialization he experiences as an aging man of reduced utility. He's being trivialized, in some sense infantilized, not just by his family, but also by Howard, who also fires him, by Charlie, who thinks he needs to be attended to physically, mentally, financially. So he thinks that he's being his utility, his sense of utility is getting increasingly diminished, not just in his professional space, but in all the other spaces, including the domestic space. So this continues to get triggered out. There are hardly any events that happen which is reassuring to Willie Loman. Nothing reassures him, and nothing is able to affirm or reaffirm his faith in what he is as a person, what he is as a professional, what he is as a family man. And then we also realize how this recursive this recurrence of Ben in his hallucinations, and this need to go back and anchor himself on what could have happened if he had been with Ben, that also represents this tantalizing possibility of succeeding in a capitalist framework. And this is, Willie Loman also knows that this is something that he could perhaps never could have become. But he also knows that the possibility was offered to him. So it is this hope, it is this dream to which he seems to be constantly connected with. And he seems to be unable to take him or, in some sense, his sons away from that. They're all in pursuit of that dream, though in various forms. So Ben, in that sense, gets foregrounded as that voice, which is at the same time very reassuring, but it's also a bit skeptical. So, like he says, the jungle is dark but full of diamonds, Willie. So, it is not a world, it is not a picture perfect, promising world that Ben is offering, Ben had offered to Willie Loman. But that's how he promises, that's how he chooses to see it. Yeah, it's the dark side of it, perhaps, that is what scared Willie Loman as a person, and which is why perhaps he never ventured into it. But now, when he's looking back, he's only seeing the prospect of diamonds, which he did not pursue at all. So this is also, could be usefully contrasted with Biff when Biff says, "Why am I trying to become what I don't want to be? What am I doing in an office, making a contemptuous begging fool of myself when all I want is out there waiting for me? The minute I say, I know who I am. Why can't I say that, Willie?" Yeah, so we find that, all of these characters are facing their own dilemmas in some form or the other. But towards the end, it is Willie whose life gets sacrificed in this process. So now we'll quickly move to the Requiem in Act 3, where Linda, her sons Charlie and Bernard are the only ones attending Willie's funeral. And this funeral, very interesting to note, it is nothing like that of the salesman, David Singleman, who Willie says, it was Singleman's life, it was which inspired him to become a salesman, looking at the kind of large gathering at the funeral. The large gathering who had come in awe of the kind of life that Singleman had led. So it's nothing close to what Willie's life and Willie's death both are like no way close to what David Singleman had lived, or David Singleman's funeral had witnessed. And his death is, obviously, we get to know it was a suicide, and we see this impending, we see this imminent thing right from the beginning. And the tragic irony is that though Willie realizes very tragically somewhere in between that maybe his worth is more after his death, his family does not receive the insurance money. So Linda soliloquy in that sense, Linda also emerges as this figure which deserves a lot of compassion. Yeah, her tragedy becomes more accentuated towards the end, and it ends with this paradoxical notion of freedom. I made the last payment on the house today, dear, and there'll be nobody home. We are free and clear. We are free. So this is something, it accentuates the notion of tragedy. Like Willie Loman had been working towards this moment all his life, and now that, he loses his life again, for nothing. And then the crisis that the family had been facing, that also seems to be at the end of a resolution. So no matter in which way one tries to negotiate it, there never seems to be a happy ending for this. And this is perhaps what this play is also trying to foreground, that no matter in which way you negotiate with it, once you begin to pursue this dream, there is bound to be disillusionment, and there is bound to be these tragic failures at different points of time. Yeah, so even after in material terms things seem to be resolved, it does not entirely, entail a freedom in that sense. So each character at the end, we realize that, they have a very different perception of the kind of man Willie Loman was. So Charlie's sympathetic view, we will wrap up today's session with that view. Charlie's view seems to be more of an indictment of the system, than the individual. And this is perhaps, the one point the play is also trying to hammer home. Nobody does blame this man. You don't understand. Willie was a salesman, and for a salesman, there's no rock bottom to the life. He don't put a bolt to a nut. He don't tell you the law or give you medicine. He's a man out there in the blue, riding on a smile and his shoes shine. When they start not smiling back, that's an earthquake. And then you get yourself a couple of spots on your hat and you're finished. Nobody does blame this man. A salesman has got a dream, boy. It comes with the territory. So thank you for your time, and I will look forward to seeing you in the next session.